And following prime time, you can relive the excitement and the glamour of the 71st Academy Awards. That's at 10:10. But now it's time for the 9 o'clock news with Anne Doyle.
Immediate threat of war, says Belgrade. The Russian Prime Minister goes home. The British Home Office fails to block the early release of IRA prisoners. Another resignation from the Board of Telecom, this time Deputy Chairman Ron Bolger. And wrong diagnosis resulted in this woman losing a healthy breast. Good evening and welcome. The Yugoslav government declared what it called a state of immediate threat of war tonight following the failure of further talks in Belgrade between US envoy Richard Holbrooke and President Milosevic on the Kosovo peace option. Mr. Holbrooke is now in Brussels to brief NATO, which for its part is poised to bomb strategic Serb locations in Kosovo. The Russian Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov, who this morning left Shannon for Washington, is now returning to Moscow. American and European diplomatic staff in Belgrade have been recalled.
The Taoiseach Bertie Ahern and the Taoiseach Mary Harney were at Shannon Airport to greet Yevgeny Primakov during a short stopover on his way to Washington. The intention was to discuss bilateral relations and Ireland's trade with Russia, but the agenda was dominated by the crisis in Kosovo. Mr. Primakov once again made clear Russia's opposition to NATO airstrikes.
We're against airstrikes on Kosovo. We don't see any reason for that. From any point of view. We don't think that all the political possibilities have been used by this time. We're firmly against this. Firmly against this.
In Washington, it was announced that the United States saw no grounds for optimism about peace in Kosovo after its special envoy Richard Holbrooke failed to persuade President Slobodan Milosevic to agree to the international peace plan for the province. Shortly afterwards, Yevgeny Primakov postponed his trip to the American capital. Diplomatic efforts to defuse the Kosovo crisis have failed, significantly increasing the likelihood that NATO airstrikes against Yugoslavia will take place. Failure was acknowledged this afternoon when President Clinton ordered his special envoy, Richard Holbrooke, to return home from Belgrade.
Sunday, Secretary Albright dispatched Ambassador Dick Holbrooke to Belgrade to talk to President Milosevic one last time. I believe Mr. Holbrooke is on his way back, because I can tell you, as of last night, as of this morning, as of an hour ago, we got nowhere.
The Yugoslav parliament has voted overwhelmingly against accepting the international peace plan. The Yugoslav government has declared what it calls a state of immediate threat of war. Britain and Germany have closed their embassies in Belgrade and recalled all diplomatic staff. US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has also ordered the US Embassy in Belgrade to close and urged all Americans in Yugoslavia to leave immediately for their own safety. NATO is ready to launch airstrikes against Yugoslavia within hours if necessary. Annabelle Egan, RTÉ News.
A short while ago, I spoke to our Deputy Foreign Editor, Sean Whelan, in the Serb capital, Belgrade. I first asked him for a reaction to that cancelled visit to Washington by Prime Minister Primakov.
Well, the cancellation of the visit was somewhat surprising in that it came so early. Mr. Primakov had said earlier today, before he left Moscow, that if there was the possibility of NATO airstrikes, he would cancel his visit. However, he seems to have turned the plane around in mid-air after a conversation with Vice President Al Gore. So obviously Mr. Primakov didn't want to be in Washington when the threat of NATO airstrikes, the very real threat of NATO airstrikes, was happening.
We have seen the sterling efforts by US envoy Holbrooke over the last 24 hours, particularly to avert this crisis. Where did the talks break down? Why did they fail, Sean?
They failed because Mr Holbrooke put two key points to Mr Milosevic. He said, firstly, you must stop fighting immediately in Kosovo. Secondly, you must allow NATO troops to come into Kosovo to oversee a peace agreement. Mr Milosevic flatly refused both points. In fact, Mr Holbrooke, speaking about 3 hours ago, said that he didn't seriously want to address either of these issues at all during their talks over the past 24 hours. They had 3 separate bouts of talks and they ultimately yielded nothing in the end. So Mr Holbrooke, who has dealt with Mr Milosevic extensively over the past 4 years, eventually decided this was the bleakest situation that he's encountered over those 4 years of Balkan diplomacy and just walked out. Enough was enough. He wasn't getting anywhere. He's gone back to Brussels tonight and then ultimately on to Washington.
And of course we've seen the Serb Parliament flatly reject the idea of the presence of foreign troops. How hardline is the atmosphere there in Belgrade, Sean?
It is very hard line, and we've seen this building up over the past couple of weeks. Public opinion has not been softened up to the prospect of having NATO troops coming into Kosovo. The media here is quite tightly controlled. Public opinion tends to be softened up for any kind of changes in government policy. Haven't seen that at all. We've in fact seen the opposite of that happening over the past couple of weeks, particularly over the past couple of days. The rhetoric has become very, very militant, and we saw it most blatantly expressed, I think, today in the Serbian Parliament. A live television debate all day with deputy after deputy getting up, denouncing the Rambouillet agreement, denouncing NATO and flatly refusing to have them in the country, and voting almost unanimously within a few minutes of Mr Holbrooke deciding to leave the country that they wouldn't have NATO troops in Kosovo.
The High Court in Belfast has tonight rejected an appeal by the British Home Secretary Jack Straw, who was opposing the early release of 3 IRA prisoners under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. The 3, Paul Kavanagh, Thomas Quigley and Gerard McDonnell, are expected to be freed from the maze tonight.
During a hearing lasting over 5 hours, lawyers for the British Home Secretary argued that the Sentence Review Commissioners in Belfast had been wrong to allow the 4 IRA prisoners to be released early because the Commission had not taken proper account of the original tariffs of imprisonment imposed by the courts in England. He said the Commissioners had acted wrongly by treating Pat McGee and the others as if they'd been sentenced in Belfast. A lawyer for the Commission, though, rejected those arguments. He said those carrying out the review of the sentences were entitled to take into consideration outside factors such as the peace agreement and the future of Northern Ireland. Michael Lavery, QC, acting for the 4 IRA prisoners, argued that what Jack Straw was saying in effect was that my prisoners are going to be treated differently from prisoners in Northern Ireland. Mr Lavery said, why should prisoners here not be treated the same unless there was some legal impediment to that? He said there wasn't one. The judge, Mr Justice Girvan, ultimately agreed with that view. He said the actions of the Sentence Review Commissioners had been closely reasoned and carefully formulated and not legally flawed. He said, therefore, he would dismiss Jack Straw's appeal.
I think it's a good decision that the Sentence Review Commission's decision has been upheld. I think it exposes Jack Straw to be politically involved in an attempt to frustrate or delay the release of Republican prisoners.
Counsel for the British Home Secretary later announced they would not be making any appeal against tonight's decision, for the time being at least. Brendan Wright, RTÉ News, at the High Court in Belfast.
The North's First Minister David Trimble has accused Sinn Féin of not delivering on optimistic signals on the decommissioning issue it made in Washington last week. For his part, Gerry Adams has countered with claims that the Unionists didn't want to know when Sinn Féin tried to discuss how the next phase of talks might be handled.
This day of meetings and discussions began at Dublin Airport, where Bertie Ahern, on his way to Shannon to meet the Russian Premier, had half an hour of talks with the Sinn Féin leader. Afterwards, both sides were markedly downbeat. In Belfast, the SDLP was the first of the parties to see General John de Chastelain. As he left, John Hume said the time had come for Republicans to contemplate a weapons handover.
A gesture would be very helpful, particularly in the Semtex field. And we have spelt that out very clearly, that if a load of Semtex was left on a hillside and General de Chastelain was told where it was, that would obviously be very helpful.
But there was a familiar response from Martin McGuinness as he emerged from his session with the General. The IRA would not decommission, he said, and there would be no gesture. Sinn Féin then met with the SDLP before their talks with David Trimble, a meeting that went badly, with Unionists accusing Republicans of going back on earlier optimistic signals.
We heard yet again a simple reiteration from them of their position, which they represent as that this is something they can't do, whereas the reality of the matter is that it's not a matter of something they can't do, but that it's something that the Republican movement won't do.
Today's engagement, we explored, or tried to explore, with Mr. Trimble and Mr. Taylor, the management of the next phase of this process, but it's obvious that they do not want to know.
After today's testy meeting, unionists say they're more insistent than ever on actual decommissioning occurring and say they're encouraged by John Hume's remarks earlier today. So, no progress at this meeting and a difficult week of talks ahead. David Davenport, RTÉ News, Stormont.
EU leaders meet in Berlin tomorrow with the Agenda 2000 reform package and the crisis in the European Commission the main items on the agenda. The Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who both arrived in Berlin this evening, will also discuss the peace process on the fringes of the summit. The two began a bilateral meeting at a Berlin hotel a short time ago. Our Europe editor Tommy Gorman joins us now from Berlin. Tommy, which issues in particular are expected to be raised at the Ahern-Blair meeting?
Well, the Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister will be reviewing developments in the evolving situation in the north. Mr Ahern has a specific interest in raising the question of the role of David Phillips from the Kent Police in the Rosemary Nelson murder investigation. It had been suggested in some British circles that the role of Mr Phillips would be reduced to one of an observer, and the Taoiseach wants to make sure that he has a supervisory role in that investigation. So they're discussing that just now. Mr Ahern arrived here in the last 15 minutes.
And turning to the European agenda, Tommy, this is being described as a tough summit for Mr Ahern. Why is it such a tough one for Ireland?
Well, I suppose, Anne, when there were funding discussions in the past involving Ireland and the other EU member states, the Taoiseach came away with a doubling of resources for Ireland. It was the era of the good old EU gravy train, when we were given transfers to bring us up to the European average. Well, that stage has now arrived, and the Taoiseach here at best is going to come away with half of what we have at the moment. So just imagine going into wages negotiations as a trade unionist, knowing you are going to be offered 50% of your existing rate. That's the difficulty Mr Ahern faces here.
So how would you read the outcome this time tomorrow evening, Tommy?
Well, a very interesting development will take place tomorrow at around 6 o'clock. It's expected that each member state will be given what's called its indicative allocation. That's the amount of structural funds we're likely to get from now until the year 2006. And I suppose we all remember the night Albert Reynolds claimed that we had won £8 billion over 7 years at the Edinburgh Summit in 1992, and the political implications of that development. The Taoiseach, if he's lucky, will get between £3 and £4 billion for a 7-year period. So far in the negotiations, the Irish have done well on cap reform, they've done well on regionalisation, but the real difficult question should be resolved by this time tomorrow night.
Thanks, Tommy, for joining us. And there we take a break. Still to come on the 9 o'clock news, ESB staff demand a share of the company's profits. They want £4,500 per worker. And overcharging revelations, Tesco says sorry and promises to correct discrepancies.
Are you wrestling to hand wash your woolly jumpers? Find you're up against some real heavyweight? Fighting to get a submission?
Now there's Doyle for dry clean only and hand wash clothes at home. First use the stain removal kit to remove fresh stains on your woolly jumpers, skirts, even jackets. Pop them into the Doyle bag with the pre-moistened Doyle sheet, hand into your tumble dryer for 30 minutes where fresh cleansing vapours are released. Doyle cleans and freshens clothes and has the Woolmark approval.
Which leaves you to do some wrestling of a different kind.
New Doyle, a fresh choice for dry clean only and hand wash clothes.
Computing behind 75% of the world's cash machine transactions.
things are designed to do only one job. The Canon Page Station, however, uses digital technology so it can copy, print, fax and scan. And because it works as part of the Office network, you can now solve all your imaging problems in one.
You're welcome back. In another day of drama for Telecom Éireann, Ron Bulger, the man who was replaced by Brian Thompson, has himself resigned. Yesterday, Mr. Thompson stepped down as chairman to take up a job in a US telecommunications company. Today, his deputy, Mr. Bulger, resigned. In the light of the two resignations, Fine Gael has called on the government to consider deferring Telecom's flotation.
2 months ago, Minister for Public Enterprise Mary O'Rourke asked Ron Bulger to step aside as chairman of Telecom Éireann, a position he had held since the early 1990s. Minister O'Rourke wanted to give the job to 59-year-old Irish-American Brian Thompson, who has a proven management track record for developing world-class telecommunications companies. However, Mr. Thompson resigned yesterday because of a conflict of interest over a new position he took with a competitor of telecoms in the United States. The minister wasted no time in appointing former EU Commissioner Ray McSharry to succeed him as chairman of Telecom Éireann.
We're lucky to have somebody of the calibre of Ray McSharry who so very gladly and so very swiftly took the matter when I telephoned him. So I was speaking to the ex-chairman in 1 minute and to the new incoming chairman in the next minute, and to Brendan, to here in the department, to members of the board. So it's been ongoing like that.
However, Ron Bulger's decision to resign this evening has complicated matters at Telecom Éireann and has left the minister open to attack.
We were very surprised when Thompson resigned that Bulger wasn't put back into his old position. We expected that would have happened, and obviously Ron Bulger thought the same thing. He simply wasn't prepared to be chaired by somebody who had no expertise in the area, and Ray McSharry is in that category.
And do you firmly point the finger in the direction of the minister for this?
Oh, absolutely. Only this morning on Morning Ireland, she was relying on the experience and expertise of Ron Bulger on the roadshow to explain to international investors why they should commit to Telecom Éireann. Just a couple of weeks ago, she was relying on Mr. Thompson's international expertise as an expert on the flotation of telecom companies. And now she's left with a situation where she has nobody on the board who has any real experience of floating major companies. She has nobody on the board with major expertise and experience of telecommunication companies, and there's a doubt about her own competence.
Telecom Éireann is estimated to be worth about £5 billion and is considered to be a fundamentally strong and well-managed company. However, Ron Bulger was chairman of this company for more than 6 years. The fact that he's resigned within 3 months of its flotation on the stock market will ensure that the board meeting to be held here tomorrow is likely to be a tense and lively affair. George Lee, RTÉ News at Telecom Éireann headquarters in Dublin.
And a short time ago, Minister O'Rourke announced that she has appointed Pat Malloy as a non-executive director to the Telecom board. He's a former group chief executive of Bank of Ireland. Unions at the ESB are to lodge an unprecedented pay claim demanding 12.5% of the company's profits backdated to the beginning of 1997. RTÉ News understands that the claim on behalf of the company's 8,500 staff will be lodged formally tomorrow morning with the company's own internal arbitration service, the Joint Industrial Council. The £37 million claim would mean a payout of about £4,500 per worker.
It's just a fortnight since unofficial action at ESB power stations put electricity supplies to consumers across the country in jeopardy. Now unions at the company are to lodge an unprecedented standalone claim under Partnership 2000 for a share of the company's profits, dating back to 1997, and already the government is concerned. RTÉ News understands the claim, to be lodged officially tomorrow morning, will be for 12.5% of the ESB's profits, backdated to January 1st, 1997. Total profits for those 2 years were £300 million. That would mean a claim pitched at more than £37 million, roughly £4,500 per worker. Union leaders are expected to make their case under Chapter 9 of Partnership 2000, which provides for payments in addition to the basic increases under the national agreement, usually in return for productivity. But they warn they won't allow the claim to be rolled over into a successor to the Internal Cost and Competitiveness Review, the restructuring agreement which runs out in May. However, the ESB points out that there's already a 5% employee shareholding scheme and an annual cash payment, both paid for out of profits. The company said tonight, this is a cost-increasing claim that contravenes the spirit and the intent of Partnership 2000. This claim will be lodged with the ESB's own internal arbitration service, the Joint Industrial Council, tomorrow morning. The final touches are being put to it tonight. It will set alarm bells ringing within the company, but workers may well regard it as one last fling before deregulation. Peter Klusky, RTÉ News, ESB headquarters in Dublin.
James Gogarty has been accused by a lawyer at the Flood Tribunal of telling vicious lies by linking Bertie Ahern and former Taoiseach Charles Haughey to allegations of corruption in the planning process. The two were mentioned in a draft statement drawn up in 1997, but their names were later omitted on legal advice from Mr Gogarty's sworn affidavit to the tribunal.
In his draft statement, Mr Gogarty alleged that during a conversation about rezoning in 1989, builder Michael Bailey told him that he was a major contributor to Charles Haughey and Ray Burke, and that they controlled the Fianna Fáil vote on Dublin County Council. He added that they had a very good lieutenant in Bertie Ahern. Counsel for Michael Bailey, Colm Allen, wanted to know why Mr Haughey and Mr Ahern's names had not been included in Mr Gogarty's sworn affidavit to the tribunal. Mr Gogarty's legal team said they'd been omitted following legal advice.
Mr Allen said that this was another example of Mr Gogarty's taking the names of individuals and traducing them with no regard to the effect on their lives, reputations or careers. You tell lies constantly, he said. This is a deliberate, vicious and nasty lie. Mr Gogarty said, I completely reject your vicious allegations.
Moving on to the sale of the lands at the centre of this inquiry, Mr Allen challenged Mr Gogarty's account that it was Joseph Murphy Sr. who set up the first meeting between himself and Michael Bailey as a prospective purchaser of the lands and as someone who had a good relationship with George Redmond. Mr Allen put it to him that Mr Bailey would say he had never met Joseph Murphy Sr. to this day, that he was a total stranger to him. Mr Gogarty later denied that the Bailey brothers had ever visited him at his home or that he'd given them a list of contact numbers for the Murphys. Mr Allen produced such a list and Mr Gogarty conceded it appeared to be in his handwriting, but he said it was a complete lie that he had ever given it to Michael Bailey. Anne-Marie Smith, RTÉ News, Dublin Castle.
The supermarket chain Tesco has given an undertaking to the Office of Consumer Affairs that it will rectify any discrepancies found in its prices as a matter of urgency. This follows a survey by the independent retailers group RG Data, which found that in 6 Tesco supermarkets, customers were overcharged by an average of 3% on some items last week.
The Tesco supermarket in Ballybrack was one of the 6 stores surveyed in the Dublin and Wicklow areas last week. The survey was carried out by RG Data after an irate customer complained to the Office of Consumer Affairs about being overcharged.
In this particular branch in Ballybrack, the overcharge was over 9%. We spent £43, we were overcharged by about £4. Now that's appalling. For instance, there was a 50p sticker off with the rum, and we didn't get the 50p off. There's a quiche Lorraine, which is £1.69, marked £1.19. We were actually charged £1.99 for it. Now, this is misleading. It breaks the Consumer Information Act, and if you take it across the entire Tesco turnover, you're looking at millions of pounds.
How many products have actually been going through the system overpriced?
The rate at which they might go through, and this would be statistically correct, would be about 1 in 100,000. So actually it's probably at the rate of about 10 a week. That's the level. So the numbers that have been bandied about, I think, are probably overstated. However, that's not to say that we don't take it seriously. We take it very seriously, and even 1 inaccuracy is too many as far as we're concerned.
I found I was overcharged with a tin of salmon yesterday, which is normally sold at 79p, and as you can see on my receipt, I was charged £2.39 for it.
As from today now,
I will start checking my prices of my things, because my neighbour told me that she has been overcharged before for 2 things.
Tesco Ireland say a larger than usual number of price inaccuracies may have arisen recently because the company is still adapting to new high-tech checkout systems. But a complete check of all prices, special offers and promotions is now being carried out to eliminate these discrepancies.
This week we're going to every single product in every single store across the country, and we're going to check every single product to make sure that it is right.
Tesco say that any item found to be overpriced this week will be given free of charge to the customer. Theresa Mannion, RTÉ News, Dublin.
A hospital in England has admitted that it removed a woman's healthy breast by mistake following a wrong diagnosis. The 28-year-old woman had a mastectomy after doctors told her she had cancer.
This woman's ordeal began just before Christmas when she discovered a small lump on her right breast. Unknown to her, it was harmless fatty tissue. She went for a checkup to the Royal Chesterfield Hospital in Derbyshire. In February, she was told she had breast cancer and was advised to have her breast removed. 2 weeks after the operation, doctors realised a mistake had been made. They discovered that a slide sample of her healthy tissue had been mixed up with that of a patient who had cancer.
They put me so well and back for 8 weeks for nothing. I can't explain how I feel. I'm so mad what they've done to me because they've ruined my life.
I think a mental state is going to take a long time to come to terms with.
An investigation has been launched by the hospital and a laboratory technician suspended. The hospital has accepted full responsibility for the mistake, but it could now face a bill of up to £500,000 in compensation. Michelle McCaughrean, RTÉ News.
The Football Association of Ireland has accused UEFA of sitting on the fence after the governing body failed to postpone Saturday's Euro 2000 qualifier in Macedonia. UEFA has deferred a decision on the match until tomorrow. As things stand, the game will go ahead despite the threat of NATO airstrikes in neighbouring Kosovo. And the main news again this evening. The Yugoslav government declared a state of immediate threat of war tonight following the failure of talks in Belgrade. NATO airstrikes on strategic Serb locations in Kosovo are now increasingly likely. And that's Tuesday's 9 o'clock news. News 2 is next. It's at 22:11. I'll be back tomorrow at 9. I look forward to your company.
I am in control of Flight 343.
Sir, I don't think this is about hostages.
What are you talking about?
A shipment of the nerve toxin DZ5 was hijacked.
Are you saying nerve gas is on board?
Yes, sir, I am. They plan to use the DZ5 and the airplane together to detonate here over Washington.
I know you wrote the book on assaulting hijacked aircraft, but this is 5 miles above the Earth.
I don't think we have any other options.
Now you have your orders. Execute them.
Kurt Russell 007 and Steven Seagal in Executive Decision, your midweek movie, Wednesday at 9:30 on RTÉ One.
Good evening. This is the severe tropical cyclone Vance, which hit the northwest of Australia on Sunday night, and it gave the highest ever winds recorded in Australian history of 166 miles per hour. It has passed away at this stage, and thank you to both the Japanese and Australian Weather Bureau for this satellite picture. Now, the tropical cyclone season in the southern hemisphere lasts from about November to May, and then in the northern hemisphere we're talking about June to November. So we're actually at a transition point at this stage, if you like, because the sun is directly over the equator. And in fact, you can make it out, these severe thunderstorm activity with the sun directly overhead, temperatures of about 35 to 40 degrees Celsius. Intense echoes there, the black there showing very intense thunderstorm activity indeed. Now further north over Ireland, temperatures are much more moderate, 13 degrees Celsius, still above average for the time of year. Out to the west, this white band of cloud corresponding to a cold front, and that is going to introduce much cooler conditions over the next day or two. Tomorrow, a fairly fresh westerly airflow, followed by northwesterly winds during Thursday. Good sunny spells, but some night frost returning, but that's certainly not a problem tonight. It is mostly cloudy with some scattered outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The rain turning heavy in the west and northwest during the night, accompanied by strengthening southwesterly winds in sea areas getting up to between force 6 and gale force 8, and temperatures not falling below about 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. During the morning, it is going to brighten up to the west and northwest. In the east, though, staying cloudy with some outbreaks of rain on and off. Now, the rain will be fizzling out as the day progresses, but still rather cloudy with just 1 or 2 bright spells developing, and at the same time some showers pushing in there from the northwest. Now, cooler than today, temperatures tomorrow about 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. Fresh southwesterly winds will ease down during the day, and we're talking about fairly light northwesterlies for Thursday, feeding down a mixture of sunshine and showers and some night frost. Good night.
Call and see who's up out of bed.
How will Ireland fare when EU funding is phased out? Primetime reports next on One.
On tonight's programme, neo-Nazis in California, behind the scenes at the Oval Office, and far too many tears at the Oscars. See you after News 2.